All right, listeners, buckle up because today we're going deep, really deep into the world of Bitcoin. And not just any Bitcoin chit-chat. We're going straight to the source. The original Bitcoin white paper, you know, the one from 2008 by the mysterious Satoshi Nakamoto?
That's right back to the genesis of this whole crypto revolution.
Now, I'll be honest, Bitcoin can sometimes feel like a black hole. All those technical terms and algorithms can be a bit overwhelming, but that's why we're here to break it down, extract the core ideas, and hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a solid grasp of what Bitcoin is all about, even if you're not a coding wizard.
Exactly. Our mission is to translate the white paper into plain English.
Sounds like a plan. So first things first, let's set the stage. What problem is this white paper even trying to solve?
Well, the white paper starts by describing the current financial system, how we rely on banks and other institutions as middlemen for basically every transaction. We trust them to handle our money, to process payments, and resolve any disputes. But this reliance on trust comes with its own set of problems.
Like what? I mean, haven't banks been doing a decent job?
To a degree, yes, but the white paper points out some inherent weaknesses in the system. For example, truly irreversible transactions are almost impossible with traditional systems. Banks can reverse payments, which can be helpful in cases of fraud. But it also creates uncertainty for merchants. They worry about chargebacks, and those costs end up trickling down to us, the consumers.
That makes sense. And I guess it also makes small casual transactions online pretty impractical because of the fees involved. You know, like if you wanted to send someone $1 for their awesome meme.
Precisely. The overhead cost is just too high. And then beyond that, there's a whole issue of needing a trusted third party in the first place. Merchants need to verify. Customers' fraud is often accepted as like a necessary evil. There's just a lot of friction in the system.
So Bitcoin wants to cut out the middleman entirely, like a peer-to-peer financial network. But wouldn't that lead to chaos? What's stopping people from just spending the same Bitcoin over and over again?
That's the million-dollar question. And it's where Bitcoin's real brilliance lies. Instead of relying on trust and centralized institutions, it introduces this revolutionary concept, a system based on cryptographic proof.
Now we're talking cryptographic proof. Break it down for us.
Essentially, Bitcoin uses a distributed network and some clever math to achieve what banks do, but without the bank. One of the key innovations is this thing called a timestamp server. It creates a permanent, tamper-proof record of when transactions took place.
So like a digital notary, but for money.
Yes, a great analogy. And by combining this timestamping with something called proof of work, Bitcoin creates this chronological chain of transactions that's incredibly difficult to alter.
Okay, proof of work. Now that's a term I've heard thrown around a lot. What's the deal with that?
Think of it like a massive decentralized puzzle that everyone on the Bitcoin network is working on. Computers compete to solve complex math problems, and the winner gets to add a new block of transactions to the chain. This process requires a ton of computing power, making it virtually impossible for anyone to go back and tamper with past transactions. It would be like trying to rewrite history, but needing the world's most powerful supercomputer to do it.
Whoa, that sounds incredibly secure. But why make it so difficult? What's the logic behind that?
Well, the difficulty is the very thing that ensures the security of the whole system. Imagine you're a bad actor and you want to double spend some Bitcoin. To do that, you'd need to rewrite the blockchain. And not just a little bit. You'd have to outcompute the entire network, redo all the proof of work for every block since the transaction you want to change. It's a monumental task, practically impossible.
So it's like a security through complexity approach. The more people participate, the harder it becomes for anyone to cheat the system.
You got it. And this brings us to the famous blockchain itself. It's essentially a public ledger, a chain of blocks, and each block contains a batch of transactions, a timestamp, and a link to the previous block. This structure creates an unbreakable chain of information, a chronological record that's very, very resistant to tampering.
Okay, the blockchain picture is becoming clearer. But let's zoom in on a single transaction. How does that actually happen within this system? Say I want to send you some Bitcoin. What does that look like behind the scenes?
That's where digital signatures come in. The white paper describes each electronic coin as a chain of these signatures. So when you want to transfer Bitcoin, you're essentially adding your signature to the next link in the chain. It's like passing a digital baton, with each signature representing proof of ownership.
Ah, so it's not like sending a physical object, but more like transferring ownership through these digital signatures.
Precisely. And anyone on the network can verify this chain of signatures to confirm the entire history of that Bitcoin, tracing it all the way back to its origin.
Okay, that makes sense. But you mentioned the double spending problem earlier. How does the blockchain actually prevent me from spending the same Bitcoin twice? It sounds like this digital signature passing could be replicated.
That's where the public nature of the blockchain comes in. Every transaction is broadcast to the entire network and recorded in the blockchain for all to see. So if you try to spend the same Bitcoin twice, the network would immediately see that it's already been spent and reject the second attempt.
Ah, I see. So it's like having a giant transparent ledger that everyone has access to. No sneaky double spending because everyone can see what's going on.
Exactly. That's a key difference between Bitcoin and traditional systems. Instead of relying on a bank to verify transactions and prevent fraud, Bitcoin relies on the transparency and immutability of the blockchain.
Okay, this is all starting to click, but can we go back to that proof of work thing? It seems like a pretty crucial part of the whole system. And I'm still a bit fuzzy on how it actually works.
You're right, it's worth delving deeper. So imagine a block of transactions is ready to be added to the blockchain. To make that happen, computers on the network race to find this special number. It's called a nonce. This nonce, when combined with the block's data and run through a special function, produces a specific output.
Hold up, you're talking about a hash function, right?
Yes. Think of a hash function like a digital fingerprint for data. It takes any input, no matter how big or small, and produces this unique fixed-size output called a hash.
Okay, I remember now. So finding this nonce to create a specific hash, that's the proof of work.
You got it. The trick is this specific hash needs to have a certain number of leading zeros, which is very, very hard to find. Computers have to try different nonces over and over again until they hit the jackpot. It's a computationally expensive process.
So the more zeros required, the harder it becomes. And the more secure the blockchain is. It's like a digital arms race for security.
That's a great way to put it. And the network automatically adjusts this difficulty, usually targeting one block being added every 10 minutes, just to maintain stability.
That makes sense. But why go through all this trouble? Why make it so difficult just to add a block?
Because this difficulty is what prevents tampering. If someone wanted to change a past block, they wouldn't just have to redo the proof of work for that one block. They would have to redo it for all the blocks that came after it, and they'd have to do it faster than the entire rest of the network.
Wow. That sounds like a fool's errand. I wouldn't want to try that.
Exactly. The white paper actually uses this analogy of a gambler's ruin. The more blocks that are added, the more exponentially difficult it becomes for an attacker to succeed. They're basically fighting a losing battle.
Okay, now I see why people say the blockchain is so secure. It's practically tamper-proof. But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about the network itself. How do all these computers, these nodes, as I've heard them called, how do they communicate and agree on which blocks are valid?
Right, nodes. Think of them as individual computers running the Bitcoin software. They're like the workers of the Bitcoin network, constantly communicating with each other, relaying information about transactions and blocks. They all work together to maintain the integrity of the blockchain.
Interesting. So how do they stay in sync? What's the process for adding a new block?
Well, first, new transactions are broadcast to all the nodes on the network. Then each node collects these transactions into a block and starts working on finding the proof of work, that special nonce we talked about.
So it's like a race. Everyone's trying to solve the puzzle and add the next block.
Precisely. And when a node finds a solution, it broadcasts the completed block to all the other nodes. Those nodes then verify the block, checking if the proof of work is valid and if all the transactions within the block follow the rules.
Okay, so there's this constant back and forth with nodes checking each other's work. But what if two nodes find a solution at the same time? Does that create conflict and chaos?
That's a possibility. And the white paper actually addresses this directly. If two blocks are found simultaneously, it creates a temporary fork in the blockchain. Some nodes might receive one block first, and others might receive the other. They'll start working on extending whichever block they received first, but they'll also keep track of the other branch.
A fork in the blockchain, huh? That sounds a bit ominous. Does that mean the system breaks?
Not at all. It's actually a very elegant solution. Eventually, one of the branches will become longer, meaning it has more accumulated proof of work. That longer chain is then considered the valid one, and the shorter branch is abandoned. It's a constant competition to build the most powerful chain, which further reinforces the security of the network.
This is incredible. It's like a self-regulating system where the most powerful chain always wins. But all this computing power must come at a cost. Who's footing the bill for all the electricity and hardware these nodes are using?
That's where the Bitcoin incentive system comes in. The white paper describes a very clever mechanism to reward nodes for their participation. It's what makes the whole system sustainable.
Okay, I'm all ears. How do these nodes get paid for their efforts?
The first transaction in each new block is a special one. It creates brand new Bitcoin. And those Bitcoin are awarded to the node that successfully mined the block. They essentially earn those Bitcoin by securing the network.
So it's like a reward for their computational work. But isn't that a bit like creating money out of thin air?
Not exactly. It's more like they're being rewarded for providing a valuable service. It's similar to how gold miners are rewarded for the effort of digging up gold.
So it's like a digital gold rush. But instead of digging in the dirt, they're crunching numbers.
That's a great analogy. And this incentive system is a crucial part of Bitcoin's design. It encourages people to participate honestly in the network because it's more profitable to play by the rules and earn those block rewards than to try and cheat the system.
That makes sense. It's like aligning everyone's incentives towards this common goal, a secure and functional Bitcoin network. But all this data, all these blocks and transactions being added to the chain, it seems like it would require a massive amount of storage. How does the system handle that? Doesn't it become unwieldy after a while?
You're right, the blockchain does get quite large over time. But the white paper addresses this with a clever technique. It's called Merkle trees. It's a super efficient way to organize and compress data. Instead of storing every single transaction individually, Merkle trees allow you to create a compact representation of all the transactions in a block, using this hierarchical structure of hashes.
So it's like a digital filing system that helps to save space while still maintaining the integrity of the data.
Exactly. And the best part is you can still verify the integrity of any individual transaction without having to download the entire block
Wait, how does that work?
by using something called a Merkle branch. It's essentially a path from the specific transaction you're interested in to the root of the Merkle tree. It's a clever way to prove that a particular transaction is indeed part of a specific block, without needing to download all the data. Think of it like a breadcrumb trail leading you back to the source.
Wow, that's pretty ingenious. So even if the blockchain gets massive, it's still manageable in terms of storage. That's a relief. But hold on, if the blockchain is public and everyone can see all the transactions, doesn't that mean there's no privacy?
That's a valid concern. And the white paper actually dedicates a whole section to exploring privacy in the Bitcoin network. While full anonymity is difficult to achieve in a public system, Bitcoin does offer a certain degree of privacy through the use of public keys.
Okay, remind me again how that works.
While anyone can see the details of a transaction, like the amount transferred and the time of the transaction, they don't necessarily know who the parties involved are. It's like watching a play. You can see the characters and their actions, but you don't know their real names or their backstories.
So it's like a financial stage where everyone is wearing masks.
Exactly. This separation between transactions and identities provides a level of privacy that's actually quite robust, unless someone specifically links a public key to a real-world identity. Their transactions remain anonymous.
Okay, that makes sense. But couldn't someone potentially track transactions over time and like piece together patterns to figure out who's behind certain addresses? I mean, it's all out there in the open.
That's a possibility, and the white paper acknowledges the risks of transaction linking. But there are ways to mitigate this. For example, using a new key pair for every transaction prevents them from being easily traced back to a common owner.
So it's like changing your disguise for each performance on the financial stage. The more you change your keys, the harder it becomes for someone to track your activity. This is fascinating. It's like this high-tech game of cat and mouse between privacy seekers and those trying to track them.
Yeah, you could say that. And this dynamic highlights the ongoing evolution of privacy techniques in the cryptocurrency world. It's this constant back and forth with new techniques and countermeasures being developed all the time.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the problems Bitcoin is trying to solve, the concept of cryptographic proof, the structure of the blockchain, the proof of work system, and even touched on privacy concerns. My brain is definitely getting a workout.
It's a lot to take in for
Yeah.
sure, but hopefully you're starting to see how all these pieces fit together to create this truly unique and innovative system.
Absolutely. It's clear that Satoshi Nakamoto put a lot of thought into the design of Bitcoin. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, there's one more thing I'm curious about. The white paper mentions this possibility of an attacker trying to manipulate the system. How realistic is that threat? And what kind of damage could they potentially do?
That's an excellent question. And it leads us to one of the most crucial aspects of Bitcoin, the concept of confirmation and this balance between speed and security. While the blockchain is incredibly robust, there's always a slight risk that a transaction could be reversed. especially in the minutes immediately following its broadcast to the network.
Wait a minute, reversed. I thought we just established that the blockchain is practically tamper-proof.
That's true for transactions that are buried deep in the blockchain, under many layers of blocks. But a freshly minted transaction, one that's only been included in the most recent block or two, is slightly more vulnerable. Remember our gambler's ruin analogy, that attacker trying to outrun the honest nodes?
Yes, I remember. So it's like a race against time. The longer you wait, the safer the transaction becomes.
Exactly. And the white paper actually provides some mathematical tools to estimate this probability. The probability of an attacker succeeding based on how many blocks have been added to the chain since the transaction. Each new block added to the chain decreases the attacker's chances exponentially. It's like a security countdown clock.
So it's all about finding the right balance between speed and security, based on your individual needs.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that makes Bitcoin so fascinating. It gives users this level of control and flexibility that you rarely find in traditional financial systems.
This is incredible. It's like a whole new world of possibilities is opening up.
I agree. But I think we've covered enough for now. Let's give our listeners a chance to digest all this amazing information before we dive into the next part of the Bitcoin white paper.
Sounds good to me. We'll be back soon to explore even more fascinating aspects of Bitcoin. Stay tuned.
Welcome back, deep divers. We're picking up right where we left off, exploring the fascinating world of Bitcoin through its original white paper.
I'm ready for more. We covered a lot of ground already. But the way Bitcoin balances security and practicality is what's really grabbing my attention.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance for sure. And one of the areas where this is most apparent is in how Bitcoin handles payment verification.
You mean, how do you actually confirm that a payment went through, without having to download that entire massive blockchain? That just seems like a bit of a roadblock for everyday use.
You're absolutely right. That's why the white paper introduces this clever solution. It's called simplified payment verification, and it leverages those Merkle trees we discussed earlier.
Ah, those digital filing systems that help keep the blockchain manageable. Okay, remind me how they play into verifying payments.
So instead of running a full node and storing the entire blockchain, users can opt for a lighter approach. They only need to keep a copy of the block headers, which are like summaries of each block containing essential information like the Merkle root.
And the Merkle root is like a digital fingerprint representing all the transactions within that block, right?
Precisely. So when a user wants to verify a specific transaction, they request a Merkle branch from a full node. This branch is a path connecting the transaction to the Merkle root of its block.
So it's like a trail of breadcrumbs guiding you back to the source of the transaction.
Exactly. And by following this trail, a user can confirm that the transaction is indeed part of the blockchain without needing to see all the other transactions in that block.
It's so clever. It's like being able to check a book's authenticity by looking at the table of contents and a few key pages rather than reading the whole thing.
A great analogy. This solution allows for efficient payment verification even on devices with limited storage or processing power like smartphones.
But wouldn't this simplified method be less secure than running a full node? I mean, you're relying on someone else to provide you with the information.
There's always a trade-off between convenience and security. Simplified payment verification does rely on the assumption that the majority of nodes on the network are honest. If an attacker gained control of a large portion of the network, they could potentially create fake transactions and fool these lightweight clients.
So there's still a risk, albeit small, that a very clever attacker could manipulate things.
That's right. But the white paper suggests some safeguards, like receiving alerts from trusted nodes if they detect any funny business. This would prompt users to investigate further, adding another layer of protection.
So it's like a neighborhood watch for the Bitcoin network.
Exactly. Ultimately, the level of security you choose depends on your individual needs and risk tolerance. Businesses handling large amounts of Bitcoin might prefer the added security of a full node, while casual users might be perfectly comfortable with the simplified approach.
It's amazing how the white paper anticipates so many practical considerations. It really shows that Satoshi Nakamoto is thinking about real-world use cases, not just theoretical concepts.
Absolutely. And this foresight is evident in other parts of the white paper as well. For instance, let's talk about how Bitcoin handles value in traditional systems. We deal with these fixed denominations like dollars and cents, but Bitcoin transactions can be much more flexible.
What do you mean? Does that mean you can send fractions of a Bitcoin?
Yes. But it's more than that. The system allows for combining and splitting value using multiple inputs and outputs within a single transaction.
So it's like having a digital wallet where you can merge and divide funds as needed.
Precisely. Each transaction can have multiple inputs, which are basically unspent outputs from previous transactions, and multiple outputs, which can be payments to different people or even change returned to the sender.
Okay, I'm following so far. But how does this work in practice? Can you give us an example?
Sure, imagine you have zero point 0.5 Bitcoin from one transaction and zero point 0.3 Bitcoin from another. You want to send zero point 0.6 Bitcoin to a friend and keep the rest. Instead of making two separate transactions, you can combine those two inputs into a single transaction with two outputs. One for your friend's zero point 0.6 Bitcoin and one for your remaining zero point 0.2 Bitcoin.
That's pretty efficient. It's like consolidating your pocket change into a single bill.
Exactly. This flexibility makes Bitcoin suitable for a wide range of transactions, from tiny micropayments to large transfers.
This is making more and more sense, but I have to bring up the privacy issue again. With all these transactions recorded on a public blockchain, doesn't that make Bitcoin users vulnerable? We touched on the anonymity aspect earlier, but is there more to it?
It's a valid concern and one that deserves further exploration. The white paper dedicates a whole section to privacy in the Bitcoin network, as we discussed. The system offers a degree of anonymity through public keys. But Bitcoin's privacy model is fundamentally different from traditional financial systems.
How so? I'm curious to hear more about this difference.
In traditional banking, privacy is maintained by limiting access to information. Only the parties involved and the trusted third party, like the bank, can see the transaction details. But with Bitcoin, the transaction history is public accessible to anyone on the network.
So it's like a transparent financial system where everyone has access to the records.
That's one way to look at it. But instead of relying on secrecy, Bitcoin's privacy hinges on separating transactions from identities.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Tell me more about this separation.
While everyone can see the details of a transaction, the amount, the time, the addresses involved, they don't automatically know who those addresses belong to. It's like watching a play. You can see the characters' actions, but you don't know their real names or backstories.
So it's like a financial theater where everyone's wearing masks.
That's a fantastic analogy. And this separation between transactions and identities provides a surprising level of privacy. Unless someone explicitly links a public key to a real-world identity, their transactions remain anonymous.
Okay, that makes sense. But wouldn't it be possible for someone to analyze those public transactions over time? Looking for patterns and eventually figuring out who's behind certain addresses. I mean, it's all out there in the open.
It's a valid point, and the white paper acknowledges the risk of transaction linking, but there are ways to make this much more difficult. One key strategy is using a new key pair for every transaction.
So it's like changing your disguise for every performance on that financial stage, making it much harder to be recognized.
Exactly. The more you change your keys, the harder it becomes for someone to track your activity on the blockchain.
This is turning into a real-life spy thriller. It's like a constant chess match between privacy-conscious users and those who might want to track their transactions.
It's an apt comparison. This constant evolution of techniques and countermeasures is a key part of the cryptocurrency landscape. As technology evolves, both sides are constantly developing new strategies.
So changing key pairs is important. Are there any other tips the white paper gives for staying private on the Bitcoin network?
Yes, there are a few more recommendations. One is to avoid reusing addresses for receiving payments. If you use the same address multiple times, it becomes easier to link those transactions and potentially identify you.
So it's like having a separate mailbox for each delivery to prevent someone from tracking your mail.
Precisely. And another important point is to be mindful of the information you share online. If you publicly connect your Bitcoin address to your real-world identity, you're essentially giving up your anonymity.
That's like shouting your secret identity from the rooftops.
Exactly. So if privacy is a concern, it's crucial to be deliberate and strategic about how you use and manage your Bitcoin addresses.
This is all great advice. It's clear that maintaining privacy in the Bitcoin network requires a proactive approach. Speaking of being proactive, I'm curious about the security of the network itself. We've talked about the difficulty of attacking the blockchain, but are there other vulnerabilities that users should be aware of?
That's an excellent question, and it brings us to one of the most fundamental aspects of Bitcoin. The concept of confirmation and the trade-off between speed and security. While the blockchain itself is extremely robust, there's always a slight risk that a transaction could be reversed, especially shortly after it's been broadcast to the network.
Wait, reversed. I thought we established that the blockchain is practically tamper-proof.
That's true for transactions buried deep in the blockchain, covered by layers upon layers of blocks. But a freshly minted transaction, one that's only been included in the last block or two, is a bit more vulnerable. Remember our gambler's ruin analogy, the attacker racing against the honest nodes.
Yes, I remember. So it's a race against time. The longer you wait, the safer the transaction becomes.
That's a great way to think about it. Each new block added to the chain makes it exponentially harder for an attacker to rewrite history. The white paper provides some mathematical tools to estimate the probability of an attack succeeding based on the number of blocks added since the transaction.
So it's like a security countdown clock ticking away with each new block.
Exactly. The white paper suggests waiting for 6 confirmations, meaning 6 blocks added after your transaction, to be considered reasonably safe for most situations.
6 confirmations, got it. But what about those who are impatient? Is there any way to speed up the confirmation process?
There are ways, but they involve trade-offs. Some services might accept transactions with fewer confirmations, but that comes with a higher risk of reversal. It's like choosing between a slow but reliable postal service and a faster but slightly riskier courier.
So it's about weighing the need for speed against the need for security depending on the specific situation.
Precisely. And that's another example of how Bitcoin gives users flexibility and control. They get to choose their own level of risk and reward.
This is also fascinating. I'm really starting to understand why Bitcoin has captured the imagination of so many people.
Okay.
It's not just about digital currency, it's about rethinking trust security and the very nature of transactions.
You've hit the nail on the head. The Bitcoin white paper challenges our conventional assumptions and presents this bold new vision for the future of finance.
I'm so glad we took the time to dive into this. It's been a truly eye-opening experience.
I agree. It's remarkable how much depth and insight is packed into this document. It's a testament to Satoshi Nakamoto's genius that so many of the ideas presented are still relevant and influential today.
Okay, so we've covered simplified payment verification, the flexibility of Bitcoin transactions, privacy considerations, and the balance between speed and security.
Yeah.
What else is there to explore in this treasure trove of a white paper?
Believe it or not, we've only scratched the surface. There are still some fascinating topics to unravel, like the broader implications of Bitcoin's decentralized nature and its potential impact on traditional financial systems.
Ooh, now we're getting to the juicy stuff. This is what I've been waiting for.
I know, right? But I think our listeners' brains could probably use a break after all this information. They'll save those big picture discussions for the final part of our deep dive.
Good idea. We don't want to overload everyone.
So stay tuned, deep divers. In our next episode, we'll tackle the really big questions, the potential impact of Bitcoin on the world as we know it.
I can't wait. Until then, keep those curiosity circuits firing. All right, deep divers, welcome back for the final part of our Bitcoin white paper deep dive. We've explored the technical nuts and bolts, the security measures, all the privacy considerations, and now it's time to step back and look at the big picture.
Yeah, you're right. We've laid the groundwork, and now we can really grasp the potential impact of this revolutionary technology.
Exactly. We've talked a lot about how Bitcoin works, but now I'm really curious about what it all means for the future. Like, what happens when you introduce a decentralized financial system into the world? How might it disrupt the institutions we're so accustomed to?
Those are the big questions, and while the white paper doesn't offer concrete predictions, it definitely hints at a future full of possibilities. One of the most striking aspects of Bitcoin is its resilience. Remember how we discussed its decentralized nature? There's no single point of failure, no central authority that can be controlled or shut down.
Yeah, it's like a digital version of that mythical Hydra. You cut off one head and 2 more grow back.
Precisely. And this robustness has huge implications. It means Bitcoin is resistant to censorship, to control, and manipulation by governments or corporations. It's a financial system that's truly open and accessible to anyone with an internet connection.
Wow, that's both incredibly exciting and a bit daunting. It's like handing financial power back to the people. But couldn't this lack of regulation also create opportunities for chaos? What's stopping people from using it for illegal activities?
That's a valid concern, and it's a debate that's still going strong. But it's important to remember that Bitcoin's transparency and immutability also make it a powerful tool for tracking transactions and potentially combating illicit activities. Law enforcement agencies all over the world are already using blockchain analysis to track down criminals.
So it's a double-edged sword, huh?
Yeah.
Capable of being used for good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it all comes down to how society chooses to use it And what safeguards we put in place?
It's a powerful tool that requires careful consideration and responsible use. But one thing is clear, Bitcoin has the potential to disrupt traditional financial institutions in a major way.
In what way? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, think about the services banks provide: storing money, processing payments, facilitating loans. Bitcoin, at least in theory, can handle all these functions without the need for that central intermediary.
It's like that classic line, we've been living with a system designed by geniuses that we now have to live with as fools. It seems like Bitcoin is trying to change that by cutting out the middleman and giving that power back to the individual.
It's a powerful idea. And while it's unlikely that Bitcoin will completely replace traditional banks anytime soon, it's definitely putting pressure on them to adapt and innovate.
It's like a giant wake-up call to the financial industry, pushing them to embrace new technologies and find better ways to serve their customers.
Exactly. And it's not just banks that are feeling the heat. Governments are also grappling with the implications of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. It's a real head scratcher for them.
I bet. What are some of their concerns?
Well, for starters, Bitcoin challenges the traditional role of central banks in controlling the money supply and setting monetary policy. It also raises all sorts of questions about taxation and regulation, like how do you tax something that's decentralized and borderless? How do you prevent money laundering and other illegal activities in a system that's designed for anonymity?
It sounds like Bitcoin is throwing a wrench into the gears of the entire global financial system,
Yeah.
forcing everyone to rethink long-held assumptions.
It's certainly shaking things up. And it's likely that these debates and challenges will continue for years to come. But that's what makes Bitcoin so captivating. It's not just a technology. It's a grand social and economic experiment unfolding right before our eyes on a global scale.
It's like we're witnessing the birth of a whole new era in finance, one that's still being written.
I have to admit, I started this deep dive feeling a bit intimidated by Bitcoin, but now I'm just in awe of its potential. It's so much more than just a digital currency. It's a force for change, a catalyst for rethinking how we approach trust, security, and the very nature of value.
I couldn't have said it better myself. The Bitcoin white paper is more than just a technical document. It's a philosophical treatise, a call to action, and a glimpse into a future full of possibilities.
And to our listeners, I encourage you to seek out the white paper for yourselves and really dive deep into this world. It's a journey worth taking.
Who knows, you might even be inspired to join the growing community of developers, entrepreneurs, and enthusiasts who are actively shaping this new financial landscape. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Bitcoin. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those curiosity circuits firing.